Hi, Luca. Thank you for having me and thank you for agreeing to this interview. Um, you
That's
know,
exciting. We are the other side of the planet so far.
so far, yeah, the video and the sound is like on spot, so it's quite amazing actually.
We're in a
Uh,
good place. Yeah.
yeah, so how is the weather in Las Vegas?
Another month of what we call winter, but we can't complain. But another month like this, and then when I hit March, we go on spring. We go the right season, so it's okay. My favorite time of the year is actually March and April, so we're getting there. But I mean, being inside the studio doesn't make a big difference, to be honest. I mean, I
Yeah.
live in this place, so
Yeah, it's a nice studio actually. It's
thank
really
you.
nice, very neat and very aesthetic. Uh,
Appreciate it.
yeah, beautiful. I actually realized I was your fan before I knew it because I used to listen to some electronic music. I
Oh
was
yeah,
listening to Major Lazer in my car
there we
for
go.
a
There
few
we go.
years ago, and then I learned it was you who mixed it. So
Yeah, yeah.
kudos
Well,
to
the
you.
Major Lazer, the interesting fact is that was my entry point of working with Diplo
Hmm.
at this point, like 10 years ago. And I worked on the first Major Lazer album, and then from that point on, never stopped. And then obviously any other Diplo production at this point,
Hmm.
hundreds of songs through the years. And so yeah, and there's a space on my heart for Major Lazer because it was I was really doing my creative mixing other than technical mixing on
Hmm.
that album. That album, especially the first couple of albums, was just like a blend of different styles all on one. So Major Lazer always been like innovation, dancehall, electronic, everything combined. So yeah, that's like a big record. And my biggest credit, it's Lean On, which is one of my probably if it's not my biggest record, it's one of my top three biggest songs ever that I work. So yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it's very cool. I just love it. So I think my subscribers, my students, they were curious. They will be curious how you got into the business because it's a tough
Mm.
business. I mean, it's not easy to mix major names and work with cool, all those cool guys, all those cool producers. How do you got here?
Well, first of all, if you think about it getting into what we do as a business, most likely you're not going to get into the business. You need to think first as that's really your passion. That's really what are going to commit for a long time to study, be a student constantly, never give up, and also be humble and understand the process, which is a long process. Now, the good news is the mixing different than other jobs, let's say any type of sports, like a basketball player.
Mhm.
It's a short career, right? You're going to hit when you're 25 and then you're going to phase, I would start 30, 35. Our work and it's something you get better with age. So in my case, I went to a recording school when I was 17 years old. So I did typical 3 years recording school. I learned how to record. There was just like the ending part of analog, beginning of digital. So I was very lucky to be on the right time, the right moment where traditional school, especially in Italy, will give you the knowledge of like cutting and cleaning tapes and record on 24 channel tapes and analog console. But then when I did a second year, we start to get into sampling, into digital. So I did like 3 years of school. I learned pretty much everything, but it was just the early stage where I was not sure. My heart was on mixing, but it was very young. So what
Mhm.
happened? I did initial career of being a producer in my country. I did really
Mhm.
well. With my goal always been I want to mix for a living, but I want to do it just come from like a passion point where I try to bring value and I try to use my skills when I think that song might need my help. So the starting point was very simple. I was used to go to friends and other producers, say, hey, love your song. Next single, please give me a chance to try to let me do a mix down on the next one. And then it was a win-win. There's no cost. I was just very young and try. And then from that point on, I developed relationships, and then I developed my skills. And then one of the biggest thing on mixing is the quantity really matter. When you mix as a producer with a producer mindset, you mix your own production. Your limit is how much you produce. It's equal to how much you're mixing. So if you make one song a month, great. You did 12 mixes in a year. I do about 12 mixes every 10 days. So because I'm mixing other people's music, I'm more open, and I constantly learning and apply to other people's songs. So I think the moment that I scale my business, when I start to mix more songs, my skills also went up, because now I was exposed to more mixing, more songs, different style, different techniques. So yeah, that's a little bit about, and of course, I would say that the big, the moment that I scale everything, that my name became maybe popular, was with when the EDM hit United States. So when 2010, 2011, there was a moment where United States finally was open to electronic music on the large scale, radio, TV, and then that point, like Swedish House Mafia to Steve Aoki and Diplo and everybody else started to become very popular in the United States. And I was in the middle of that group of people in a very organic way. I was just literally in Vegas, helping Diplo when Diplo was not Diplo that we know today, when Steve Aoki was not Steve Aoki that we know today. And that it was just like the beginning. And at that point, I was just very blessed to have the support of those guys, and then be able to kind of improve the quality and raise the bar with those names and kind of grow with them. And then from there, expanding to other artists. And then I would just literally penetrate the scene from the inside. So be able to, connect with artists.
So it was always about electronic music or electronic dance music in your career. I mean, and how is your studio different from maybe other studios? Do you specialize in electronic music? And
Right.
how does it make your work different from, other engineers' work that...
I would say the core is electronic music, but because dance music at one point went into pop music, into hip hop, R&B, I went outside of dance music with several records. I mixed like Drake or Nicki Minaj. So it's not necessarily dance music, but I feel dance music is my core and my starting point. So if you think a lot of engineers, they're coming from they're drummers, guitar players. I was a producer. I was thinking as a DJ. So even when I apply my skills, my techniques, and mixing any style, I'm coming from electronic music background. So as today, the studio, we are 4 studios, 3 engineers, and we have a team of 8 people. We do also we have educational division, we do plugins, we do different things, but the core is mix and mastering. Essentially, what makes us different is that we are working at 360 on the post-production side. We are not doing mastering, or we are not doing mixing. We have client that we are doing full mixes, and we take all the way to mastering, and then even further doing Atmos mixes. We have other client, we only do stereo masters. So it's more about customized about the needs of the producer, of the label. So we have big label deals with Warner and Capitol Record, but also we have independent artists that are very talented, and they're just utilizing the studio DMI just for stereo mastering, or they're working with me for mixes, and then eventually they're learning skills as far as mixing, and then after a few years we're only do mastering. So it's very custom based, on the needs of the producer or the label.
Yeah, I have so many questions about the workflow, but before I get to that, I'd like to ask about how your studio is organized and what kind of DAW do you use and why?
Yeah, well, our brain here, it's PreSonus Studio One. for a few years now, for several years actually, transitioning from about 16 years on Logic. And then
Oh,
what happened about 6 years ago at this point, I remember I was keep developing this desk you see here with kind of hybrid setup, which is kind of, I don't want to say complex, but it's very organized where there's an integration between analog and digital. And I try to do with low latency, so many little things. I remember being frustrated about Logic, not be able to have a quick, fast way to get in and out of the DAW. And I remember a friend of mine is say, hey, you should check Studio One. There is a plugin called Pipeline. And then they say, what is a pipeline is? And then I remember just during the weekend, download a demo, and then understand what pipeline was, which pipeline allowed you to do insert point any analog, so DA, AD, on the way in and out of the of your DAW, and then move the insert between plugins, even parallel the hardware with the plugins, and put in phase. So it's like, okay, so now I have a chance to get the best of the analog that I love using with integration of the DAW. I was still new to Studio One, but what I did a 6-month transition where I was keep mixing on Logic until the moment that I thought was say, oh, I need 6 months. To be honest, 2 weeks later, I was ready to pull the trigger, and I fall in love with Studio One. So, and then from that point, Studio One went from like, I remember, I think it was like 4. So it went 4, 5, now 6. And then it's exponential growth as far as like things that you can do, just the flexibility. And I think the best things for anybody, producer, mixer engineer, master engineer, is to be able to work on a state of flow. You need to be like a float state where you're actually working with something that you know so well that you don't have to think about how I can execute this. You just execute it and just put all the energy on the creative side, and the technical side should go on autopilot. So, and the perfect example that I love to make is you learn to drive a car, right? So you like to you drive a car stick, and then when you drive the first time, you keep thinking about a million things. You go from first to second, and then your friend next to you is talking to you. You say, "No, don't talk. I'm driving, right?" And then a few years later, you can have a conversation and drive, and somebody asks you, "So can you tell me what you did?" You say, "I don't know. I was just driving." You don't think anymore, right? So when you are take this concept, apply to what we do. If you're able to use tools without think about those tools, but just using it and just be on a state of flow and just get the best of you as far as the creative side, it is the best. So right now on Studio One, I'm on this state of flow where I can just work. And I looked at my watch and say, wow, 6 hours just flew. I was just having fun. And that's really a key point, because when you use something that you are not comfortable yet, you put your attention on the wrong spot.
Yeah. So
I hope that makes sense.
I get it. I understand. I think it's learning software and learning to use it quite quickly is really important thing, because then you can.
Really?
I'm wondering how do you keep yourself creative, because with mixing, like every week you mix a few recordings, and maybe you're using the same plugins and the same techniques, and how do you develop? How do you
I think
keep this passion and keep this energy?
Oh, it's a great question. And I think it's about, in my case, to have a routine. So it's a lifestyle. Mixing has to be, for me, it's an integration of everything else that I'm doing. So it's my day, it's a routine. I do certain things, including mixing. So like anything else, if you're able to make it as a part of your day and have fun, everything just come more natural, and it's use the creative side more. So in my case, I kind of have a strategic way of working where I know that my mixing days are like Monday to Thursday. I do my mastering day on Friday. And then and I have a clear vision on every single record. So I usually have a conversation with a client before I start mixing, and sometimes we understand that my position is to improve his vision. So the mix is almost there, but I'm looking to improve the quality, not reinventing the mix, which is less creative, still fun, but I'm doing a technical mixing with a technical mindset versus other records like Major Lazer, any Diplo, any other song. I'm involved more as a producer engineer instead of like technical engineer. So that including let's comp the best vocal, let's build the best reverb, let's create some texture that is borderline production. So I equally enjoy both sides. It's just a different mindset, and I do equally good. I don't have any issue to choose one versus the other one. So that's what it is. And then usually I have a routine even during the mixing phase. So when I'm mixing, if I do a full mix, I always do my stereo bus, my drum, my bass, my synth low, synth high effects, and vocal, no matter what. If I have 200 stems or 20 stems, that's my flow. And during my flow, I have breaks that I'm taking. I know that I never commit to send to a client a track the day of mixing. So I'm always give myself a little bridge time. And then, so essentially what I do, I do my mixing day, take a break, come back the next day with a listener mindset. I take notes on myself mixing, and I do potentially few notes, and then I print, and then I send the mix for approval. So I try to have it in a way that is a flow. Never rush through, never try to work 17 hours in a day. It's not gonna work well.
And do you mix, you know, having this final master in mind? I mean, do you mix to a limiter and try to have your levels close to the final ones, or you first take an approach that you maybe you like mix no matter no matter what RMS, no matter what UFS, you just mix, you try to feel the recording is pumping and it sounds nice, or you keep it technical from the very beginning? How do you start?
It's a good question. So normally I have certain elements that make me understand how loud potentially my mix is gonna sound later. So I try to have a potential loud mix. Doesn't mean that I'm pushing a mix to -5 RMS. Means the mix has the characteristic to be a loud master later, which is a balanced low end. Try to not overcompress the top ends to avoid artificial. Try to avoid too many EQ that create like phase shifting, all the kind of stuff that they're gonna make like a very challenging mastering of my mix. I try to get a mix that is potentially just level related decision on mastering, push the level up. So on my own, when I master my own mixes, obviously when I master somebody else's mixes is different. So in my case, what I do test mastering really quick, which is limiting just to see if I'm 80% to the mix. Now I start to add in vocals, and I do a quick test of limiting potentially to emulate a master to say, okay, I feel a little bit fatiguing on the bottom end. I might want to reconsider a few things on the low end. Now, normally, more I mix and less I need to do that. But if I dive into something that musically completely different, it's different, then I might do more mastery tests through the mix. If I keep doing, I don't know, another song from Diplo, or I'm working now on Skrillex album, that case, I know exactly how master will translate of my mixes without any worry. And usually when I get the end of the mix, I send to the client a loud version of the mix. You can call it master, but it's a loud version of the mix. But then if we're working on the album process, and we do multiple songs, I send a loud version of the mix for approval. But then when I get into the album, I might do final mastering as far as I retouch a final level to make sure the entire album feels cohesive and put together.
So the final master is not like a way brighter or way bass.
No.
It's really a final touch.
Yeah, sometimes what it is, sometimes if I feel that through the mix, I end up being too boomy, so I'm missing top, and I simply do a tilt. I simply do literally a tilt. So I separate like about a K or 2K, and I tilt my entire mix a little bit on the top or the bottom. But that's the tilt process. I feel it's more like if I want to place that song in a group of other songs, so I have some reference when I feel that I want to be a little bit brighter. But normally on mastering, I try to not reinvent tonal balance or space. I try to stay very close to the mix.
Yeah, when I was a teenager, you know, I used to listen to a lot of house music, and when I listen to that music today, I can feel that it's so much, you know, underproduced, I would say.
Yeah.
Still, I enjoy listening to it, but I have to admit that I enjoy listening to, you know, modern music and music you mixed much more, because it's just more pleasant to listen. It's more
It is.
balanced usually.
It is.
So how do you think over the past, I don't know, 10 years, maybe 15 years, the way that we mix actually changed? What changed? Because there were good sound engineers in the 90s and
Yeah.
20 years ago, but the electronic music sounds totally different nowadays.
Yeah, I think we have more option, more tools. DAW like Studio One give us so many opportunities to make sometimes decision that might be too drastic. So because we have a lot of tools doesn't mean that we do better mixes. Yes, we can automate pretty much everything. That's great. True, we can use 15 different reverbs versus before you had one reverb applied to multiple send on the analog board. I feel what is benefit today is the fact that we can be very specific and be able to get reach certain result based on the technology that we have, specifically with automations. So automation, I was saying, is the biggest things, because automation, you can automate EQ, so you can do filter automation. You can do borderline production work during the mixing, something impossible in the past. In the past was like solo and mute on the console to be able to do arrangement mixing. Now you can do little micro things. And probably I would say the biggest one, the one that you mentioned, is sidechain, because sidechain is something that is really related to today technology. Before, sidechain was just like a piece of hardware with another piece of hardware going in, but that's it. Now we do kind of strategic sidechain when we have the vocal pushing the synth down, and now you have the kick and bass. Now you have the mid side that you can pull the side down. So I was saying those techniques, of course, improve, but improve if you are producing with a today mindset. If you try to emulate 90s house music, you might want to say more on the, I would say, like simple, less peaks and dynamic EQ, less transient designer, just more like shelf EQ and, you know, and just like soft compression. So it's more about what you try to achieve. Obviously, there's certain things, talking today about Studio One, that I do with Studio One that I can't believe it that I was able to do mixing till like a few years ago without. So now it's just like a dream come true. Now it's actually normal. We're normalizing certain things you can do with Studio One, but then crazy that was not possible in the past, I don't know, 50 years of music, you know, things we're doing now. It's pretty crazy, like quantizing audio based on MIDI, or I mean, I do envelopes. So I have Studio One open in front of me, and actually I have a session I was doing that. So there's a few things that I love doing it. You can do the gain envelope. The gain envelope, it's on Studio One, it's insane. I mean, you can literally, I work especially with 32-bit floating files. You can take drums and change completely the design, the envelope of a snare on an audio file. So easy, so quick. So certain things, you know, we should just definitely benefit, and that's it.
So you'd rather make it like manually, not using transient designers? This is what you
Well,
meant?
the gain envelope on Studio One, essentially, when I work on a mix, and I always ask 32-bit floating file, and I get over compressed stems, snares, or snare rolls, I can literally redesign, take away, give detail. I mean, literally redesigning the waveform. So it's stunning. I mean, what you can do is
I
crazy.
have to check it out because I actually
Yeah.
I'm new to the
Well,
new
and then
version, so.
oh, it's the new version. That's insane. Also, you have another crazy thing is, which is you can apply any type of processing, delay or reverbs or anything else, distortion on piece of audio. So essentially you have a waveform, so you have your stem, and then let's say, perfect example, the way I like to use it, you have words, so you have the verse, the chorus, and you want to put delay only on words. So you have the ending part, every bar, you want to put a delay on that. You literally cut those pieces, you grab one delay, you throw on all the files and apply delays only on the file that you choose. I mean, how cool is that? You know,
Mhm,
certain
mhm,
things like this they're priceless.
mhm. You're talking a lot about stamps and mixing on stamps.
Yeah,
How do you feel about mixing on stamps? Because some artists tend to lower their costs and they'd rather send some 8 stamps or 10 stamps and not 40 audio files, 40 tracks, because they think
right.
that maybe they can save some money. How does it? How does do you feel
Well,
it's a better workflow? Perhaps
well,
more
when I
effective?
sure, no, I do different service. So when I do a full mix, I always ask to please convert any audio file as a stem. It's
Mhm.
more like commit because I'm worried that I'm gonna have the same version of the or you do some cuts on the audio, or you can have the audio file beginning till end. So yes, please
Mhm.
give me beginning till end, any audio file as a step. So, and that's the case of a full mix. If I work on mastering and I do stem mastering, then I recommend to do groups. So to do,
Mhm.
all kicks, low percussion, high percussion, synth effects, and vocal. So depends. But a full mix, I always recommend convert any audio file on a stem
Mhm.
that goes
Mhm.
beginning till end.
Mhm. So how many stems do you usually or how many tracks do you usually get for mixing, and how long does it
Uh,
take you to mix one song?
Yeah, average, I would say about 60 to 70 stems, sometimes more or less.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not prepping the mixes here. There's an assistant engineer prep all the mixes. I do V1 and I keep going on other mixes the next day.
Mhm.
Normally, a mix for me, it's about 4 hours.
Mhm. Oh, pretty fast
Mm.
for 16 tracks. So, do you have any workflow you would like to share? What tracks you start and what do you make drums first or drums and bass or just kick and bass and then vocals, or you start with vocals? Do you have any sort of certain workflow or?
Yeah, I do. I do. Always the same. So first of all, the moment we prep the song, we color code the songs all in the same way. I know dark brown is the kick, light brown is the low perk, yellow is the high perk, bass is purple. So I know that, right? So when I do that, I don't need to read the stems anymore. I go
Mhm,
by position. So I start from the top, kick, any
mhm,
type of low percussions. Low percussions for me are 1 kilohertz and down. So
mhm,
snare, rim shot, tom, loops, claps, those low percussion. And then I do high percussion, maybe open and close hats, ride, shaker, crash, any type of cymbal. So what I do essentially is kick, low perk, high perk, and then every group of percussion goes to a different bus. So and then I have my on Studio One, I have all my channels of tracks and stems from one side, and then I have my busing system. The busing system consists
mhm,
on essentially grouping every area with the same color. So again, I go by color, by position, and I usually my flow is starting from the stereo bus that's analog in front of me or in the box on Studio One regardless of stereo bus, where I do a little bit of touching of compression EQ, where I like to mix into that.
mhm,
And then I do drum mixing, where essentially I take all my drums, I do a little bit of drums process, and then I blend into the stereo bus. Past that point, I go kick, low perk, high perk, bass, and I keep going. And I do normally my first break after I finish bass, which is
mhm,
about an hour. and then I do another break, which is another hour when I finish all the synths and guitars, and I do another break before I do the vocal, and that's it. And then my 4 hours mix is finished, and then I'm gonna slip into the mix, come back the next day, literally 10 minutes, play the mix, take few notes, if I have few notes, oh, the vocals too loud, the snare too low, the kind of things. And I print and I send to the client.
I guess the kick and the bass and obviously the percussion is so important in the dance music.
Oh, yeah.
And it's also very easy to get it wrong if you're not having like perfect listening environment. So
Yeah.
is there anything you would any advice you could give to some beginners, to people who, for instance, they have a drum machine and they have like the small, you know, Moog synthesizer or other analog stuff, and they're trying to do something, but they can't get it right?
Well, based on, I don't know, 600 songs a year that come to Studio DMI, the biggest issues is always the source. The source is when you commit as a producer on your source sound, what quality is your kick, what quality is your bass, everything that is related to the foundation of the mix, get the best possible quality, and the mixing is going to be an exponential result. If you start with mixing to try to fix something that is missing on the source, so harmonics, they're not there, or transient are not there, you're starting fixing, which is not the best approach. So I will say the best investment is the quality of your samples or quality of your source and how you capture your source. So yeah, you have a Moog, great. Make sure you capture in the best possible way. So that's the best investment. Well, the second one, I would say, make sure your room allow you to listen certain frequencies. If you have a cancellation point in the room and now you have a dip of 10 dB at 50 hertz, that's a big problem because now you're pushing 50 hertz because you just don't listen, you don't hear it. So I was saying source quality of your sounds and the room translation.
Would you advise using any analyzers, and if so, which ones? Do you have any?
Well, as far as the room correction, there's few options. We use the Trinov that I'm looking right now. The Trinov, it's microphone. It's a good system. You need to have a decent room anyway, because if you have dips that are over 10 dB, it's gonna sound artificial. But Trinov is great.
Sorry, can you spell it for us?
Trinov is like TRINNOV. Is a French company, and essentially the entire desk go into that. We had a microphone that was able to read the room. What it does is pretty crazy. He's able to virtually align the speakers. So perfect alignment, reduce any type of cancellation, any phasing, and of course, any type of dip, and make sure the room is flat. I use Focal. They're great speakers, but still, if the room is not perfect, you need to correct the room.
I'm using SonarWorks Sound ID, so I'll have to check.
Oh, that's great too. That's fantastic.
Check what you're using too. Maybe I can.
Yeah, SonarWorks Sound ID is fantastic too. Actually, it's cheaper and it's easier, so that can be a great solution. Also, somebody might work on apartments where you don't have a final studio, and that's a great option for that.
Okay. And I actually kind of would like to explore this low-end theory with you just a little bit. Can you share? I know it's hard not to show it and just talk about it, but maybe you can tell a few techniques you use to inject groove and dynamics in your mixes. How do you make it? You know, pump? And is there any way? Because sometimes in my case, sometimes it happens by accident, but if I mix something well, it literally sounds as if it was faster, and it's not faster. I know I'm not moving the tempo. It's just the compression wise, or it's some magic happens.
Yeah.
What is the recipe for
yeah. It's funny. I always mention myself the same thing. I say when my mix sounds right, feels a couple of BPM faster. And that the reason why is definitely compression. I will say it's expansion. So that interaction, especially on the lower part of the range of your song transient versus the higher transient, the interaction between those two to make you feel the track faster. If you have open and closed hats, and you have a kick and snare, you have a side chain between kick, snare into the hats, it gives a feeling of being faster, because now snare, instead of sitting on top of the hats, will push the hats down, and the hats will come up when the end of the envelope of the kick and snare goes away. So that kind of movement that make you feel of grooving and speed. What I recommend doing it is be careful with saturation. Saturation on the lower part, snare, tom, kick, make the track sometimes sit a little bit too slow, versus if you apply saturation, so you have second harmonics on the top ends, on the upper mid range, so the snare, the short snares, or they make that track feels louder, even a lower level. Let me rephrase this, make sure it's clear.
Yeah, I get it.
Right? So you feel the gap. That's another point. So saturation, well used on the upper mid range, will work really well. Cleaner bottom, and maybe if you have 808s and you have a longer sine wave, stay away from distortion all the way to the first octave. Saturate only on the crossover of second octave. So now you have a clean kick, and now you have a little bit of saturation happening on the sine wave of the 808 on the second octave. So now your phone or your little speakers or computer speakers will translate the 808. But if you go too low, you apply saturation on the first octave, then will kill a lot of headroom. Now you're going to turn from a sine wave to a saw, which you don't want to do that. So yeah, those are a little bit different tricks and idea, but this different solution for sure.
And how do you feel about this artificial intelligence in mixing? Do you feel it will put us out of work in the future?
No, out of work, but it gives more option for producer. They maybe they don't have the luxury to have an engineer. I'm concerned about the AI to normalize certain mixing decision just based on not taste, but based on response. And what I try to say is this. I'm always concerned about this. If one hit record is going to mix or master with AI and it goes well, now we're going to have a series of records. They're going to try to emulate that one, even if it doesn't sound good. So that's the part that I'm concerned. My concern is make sure that we retain the quality, we're able to detach ourselves from the fact that one song maybe is very popular, but make sure that we take care about the song quality first, which is two different things. So AI, yes, you can use Ozone and just make Ozone just set up for you. That can be a good way to test it, but believe on the emotional response of a human being making a decision more, and that's what I think.
And how do you decide? Oh, this is an important question for me personally. How do you decide, or when do you decide your mix is finally finished? It's finished. When do you make this decision? You make it the next day in the morning when you listen to your mix. You made last day.
Oh yeah, it's next day in the morning for sure. But still, the moment that you define there is nothing to do on the mix, it's when you start to question yourself and you try to find the mistakes that you can't find. So if you listen to the track and naturally something hits you, it's like, oh, the vocal is too loud. I can't. Now that's something you're not. But then if you say, okay, let me listen to the song 3 or 4 times to find mistakes, this song has no mistakes. And then the risk is you cannot go on a way that psychological, it's very dangerous, which when you listen something for X amount of times, 500 times, you are not, at that point, you can't trust your decision at that point anymore. because you pass the point of the objectivity. Now you go and you start to literally, your brain start to find problems that are not there. Perfect example why there's a lot of skills producer. They're really good mixer engineer. I work with Skrillex, is genius, but sometimes as a friend, they reach out to me and say, hey, can you do a version? And then it's great as a mix engineer, but the problem is it's so attached as a producer that it loses objectivity after, days and days and days. So as an engineer, you don't want to risk to get into the same loop where you start to find mistakes instead of just listen. And that's why I would say at the beginning, as an engineer, I show up the next day with my phone. I listen to the song in a passive way, which is I'm not sitting in front of the speakers very tense. I just like walk around the room, lower level, maybe 75 decibel. I listen and I take notes. Say, oh, I don't feel this snare cutting through. And I take a notes. Oh, the reverb tail is too short. Then I sit, I have my list of notes, almost like the client send me the notes, and I go over and I'll fix.
Do you still listen in your car or in any other audio environments? No more. You just trust your.
I trust the room. We have another room with Studio M across the studio. There's an incredible response. It's like plus minus 0.5. It's just super flat. And sometimes if I want to be in a different environment, I go there. But mostly I trust the speakers. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think we exceeded like almost twice the time. So I thank you again. And maybe for the last question, what would you recommend if someone is making his music, her music, and they want to start mixing it themselves? What would you recommend they start with? EQ, compression, or maybe getting the balance right?
Well, before that, I recommend to commit the production side where you're not able to go into Serum and change sound.
Okay.
So I will say first is you finish producing. Now attack the sound with the mixer mindset, which is create your own stems, open a new session. Now the session is clean, clear from everything. You have no temptation of changing the heads. And just go. And then with the first things you want to do, stop listening from the production to the mix, at least for a few days. Don't listen to the song at all. Just listen to the song as a mixer. So you listen to the song, your own song, with a different mindset. That's very, very important. Detach
great advice.
them when you produce. Detach yourself. And when you do that, the second is that I do, leveling first, because leveling is actually EQ. So you can make an EQ move. You need to do leveling first, because if you have an open hats that are hitting 7K, that's 7K. So you want to make sure the level of the hats is right, and want to make sure that the kick level is right as well. If now you're going to risk to lower 50 hertz instead of just lower the kick. So when I say focus on level first, and then from there you're gonna make less EQ decision, less compression decision.
That's a wonderful advice. I know. I wish I knew that 15 years ago. It would make my work so much easier. So thank you again, Luca, for being here for me and for my Musoneo. And I wish you all the best, and I hope you'll stay in good health, and you'll mix for another 50 years at least.
And then I hope to come to Poland at one point, which is I love Poland. So who knows? Maybe I'm gonna sit next to you next time.
Definitely give me a call or write me an email. I'm here in Warsaw, and I'll be happy to have you.
Amazing.
Happy to invite you for a beer or coffee, whatever you like.
Fantastic. All right. Have a fantastic day. Take care.
Yeah, thank you. Same to you. Thank you. Bye-bye.